Welcome to this 2025 version of the State of the United States Economy and Society. This is part one, What's Wrong with Economics? And my name is Edward J. Dodson. What follows is an updated analysis of the state of the United States economy and important measurements of the overall strength of our society. Within this presentation, I provide what I believe are a number of reasoned recommendations for changes in public policy to address the boom to bust character of our economic system and the growing level of income and wealth inequality that threatens our very democracy. Additional proposals for systems changes are offered to achieve sustainable use of our natural resources. More than ever before, we are a society divided over whether and how we can create sufficient employment opportunities for a growing population at living wages and with measures in place that will not merely reduce, but actually eliminate environmental degradation. When one examines what occurs in the real world, there is strong evidence that economic theory is in need of correction, and that public policies derived from accepted theory must be changed. I will explore these issues further as I proceed. It is no secret that the discipline of economics has been the subject of increasing criticism for the failure of most economists to provide meaningful insights into the causes of our boom-to-bust prone economic system. For many reasons, economics has long been referred to as the dismal science, or as not a science at all. The list of critics of economics as a discipline and its value in the real world is long and growing, from within and without the discipline. One of the most vocal critics today is Steve Keen, former professor and head of the School of Economics, History, and Politics at Kingston University, London. Keen is now retired, but also holds the position of Distinguished Research Fellow at the Institute for Strategy, Resilience, and Security, University College London. In his book, Debunking Economics, he wrote, "If you look at mainstream economics, there are three things you will not find in a mainstream economic model: banks, debt, and money. How anybody can think they can analyze capital while leaving out banks, debt, and money is a bit to me like an ornithologist trying to work out how a bird flies while ignoring that the bird has wings." An important question I would put to Professor Keen is his definition of capital. Economists and their predecessor political economists too often failed to explain what they meant when they wrote about capital. Actual capital goods, buildings, machinery, technologies have characteristics quite distinct from currency or its digital equivalent, or what is broadly thought of as financial capital. The failure to make these distinctions makes scientific analysis impossible. Another problem is the interpretation of statistics. Economists and most mainstream analysts consistently point to the measurement labeled gross domestic product to indicate the extent to which our economy is growing. An increase in GDP is automatically considered a positive indicator. In reality, relying on GDP as a measurement of the health of the economy or the well-being of our society is problematic. GDP includes all spending by government regardless of the source of funding, whether from taxes, borrowing, or monetary expansion by the Federal Reserve and banking systems. More than this, there is no qualitative judgment regarding what the spending is for. A change in the calculation of, quote, real GDP using the purchasing power of the dollar in 2017 suggests a significant drop caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, followed by a return to an upward climb. But what does this mean for the overwhelming majority of the nation's households? A more insightful measure of how well our economy is doing is not captured. This is the aggregate depreciated value of capital goods. That is, our buildings of all types, machinery, and technologies. Think of this value as growing with production and at the same time losing value because of depreciation and abandonment and consumption. An important issue for policymakers is to understand the extent to which government borrowing crowds out private sector access to affordable credit. The total debt owed by the U.S. government reached $36.1 trillion on the 2nd of January 2025. $28.8 trillion of this amount is held by the public, and $7.3 trillion is held in intergovernmental accounts. Servicing debt cost $882 billion just in 2024. The federal government collected $4.92 trillion in revenue in fiscal year 2024. Thus, serving the public debt absorbs nearly $1 out of every $5 in federal revenue. This cost could increase significantly if spending increases and the interest rate on newly financed debt also increases during 2025 and subsequent years. Here is a quick snapshot of non-housing consumer debt at the end of the first quarter of 2024. By the third quarter of 2024, total household debt, including mortgage debt on residential properties, hit $17.94 trillion. Of this total, 3.5% was in some state of delinquency. What is also of concern is that credit card debt, which is unsecured, reached $1.17 trillion. Automobile debt also reached $1.64 trillion. Within the political arena, there continues to be great discussion and debate over stimulating the economy by a massive infusion of spending to repair and rebuild the nation's infrastructure. Exactly how much and how the necessary funds will be raised by the new administration is yet to be determined. The model for systemic reform embraced by most Republicans is to dramatically reduce federal intrusion into matters deemed constitutionally within authority and responsibility of the states. At least for now, the long-standing practice of federal revenue sharing and federal mandates is being dismantled. What this means for the states is that they must raise revenue themselves or discontinue funding of programs. An understanding of basic economics could help the states solve this fiscal challenge. Every public investment in infrastructure results in windfall gains to owners of adjacent and nearby locations. The public capture of these gains could significantly lower the amount of debt incurred by infrastructure spending. The economics are straightforward. Every parcel or tract of land in a community has some potential annual rental value. This rental value is capitalized by forces of supply and demand into a potential selling price. The rental value is directly related to locational advantage, and locational advantage is directly related to the quality of public goods and services available to the location. As a community and the state invest in new infrastructure, owners of land experience unearned windfall gains in land value. After subtracting whatever annual property tax payment is required, the owner experiences a net imputed income stream capitalized by market forces into a potential selling price for the land. This is where the structure of the taxation of real estate exerts either a constructive or destructive influence on the community. The higher the annual tax payment, that is, the closer the annual tax is to the potential annual rental value of the location, the lower the imputed income stream to be capitalized. Optimally, whatever improvements exist, since they are depreciating assets requiring ongoing expenses for maintenance and every decade or so require huge expenditure of funds for systems replacement, should not be burdened by taxation at all. States will also benefit by re-examining their taxation of individual income, business profits, and commerce to ensure these methods of raising revenue do not make the state non-competitive with other states. A longer-term risk of government borrowing facilitated by adding to the money supply by quantitative easing is the prospect for hyperinflation. And hyperinflation is a real threat because of government's economically harmful approaches to the raising of public revenue. The Trump administration's decision to impose high tariffs on imported goods has already triggered retaliatory and defensive responses from the governments of other countries. While a protective tariff may make it profitable for producers in the United States to begin producing goods currently imported, it also increases the cost of raw materials and resources not available in the United States. When the United States adopted a high tariff policy in 1930, the result was to turn recession into the Great Depression. Absent systemic tax reforms, the economic tools available to government and the Federal Reserve to respond to the threat of hyperinflation are rather limited. The Federal Reserve tries to find the right level of interest charged to member banks, which will then find its way through the economy and to yields on new issues in government securities. Push the rates too high and we get a recessionary downturn. Lower the rates too much and we get higher prices. As I have tried to explain, how government at all levels raises needed revenue has huge but largely ignored implications for the health of our society. Specific public policies, including taxation policies, create monopolies and quasi-monopolies that impose what are called deadweight losses on asset production and economic output. Counterproductive policies result in a lower value of goods and services produced and higher prices than would have occurred absent these policies. I have come to agree with those economists who argue that only the taxation of economic rents, including the potential annual rental value of land and land-like assets, such as frequencies on the broadcast spectrum, which have an inelastic supply, impose no deadweight loss on economic output. Back in 2007, Professor Fred Foldvari of San Jose State University explained the consequences of our current public revenue system and what the elimination of deadweight losses would do for the economy and our society. He wrote, "The overall excess burden of taxation in the USA has been estimated at about $1.5 trillion, more than 10% of total output. So roughly, our standard of living would be 10% higher if the deadweight loss were eliminated." He goes on to make the case for the elimination of most other taxes. With the elimination of taxes on wages, sales, and buildings, and entrepreneurial profits, the economy would take a quantum leap up to dazzling productivity. The demand for labor would surge and wages would jump to now unimaginable levels. Earlier, economist Milton Friedman advanced the same change in tax policy. There's a sense in which all taxes are antagonistic to free enterprise, and yet we need taxes. In my opinion, the least bad tax is the property tax on the unimproved value of land. He adds this: governments can collect taxes best on things that don't move. Land is an ideal basis of taxation because you can't take it away. A low effective annual tax on the potential rental value of locations in our towns and cities, on natural resource-laden land, and other natural assets generates a net, that is, after-tax income stream to those who control these assets. The result is intense speculation in land and high land acquisition costs for development of housing, for resources development, and other uses, even as huge areas of land in a community remain vacant. Access to cheap credit adds fuel to already speculation-driven land markets. land prices eventually reach a level where businesses can no longer absorb the cost pushed through to office, commercial, and retail rents, and a growing number of households can no longer qualify for the mortgage financing to acquire housing. The resulting stress of rising land prices brings on a property market crash every 18 to 20 years. Australian analyst Philip Anderson detailed this critical activity in his 2005 book, The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking. He wrote, "A study of U.S. history reveals a very clear average 18-year cycle in U.S. real estate prices, measured from trough to trough or peak to peak. The actual cycle has never been shorter than 17 years, never longer than 21. Anderson's firm provides investment advice to his subscribers, and he is now looking to 2026 as the year the real estate cycle will peak. Unfortunately, few policy analysts and even fewer of the nation's elected representatives have come to terms with the nation's counterproductive tax structure that is at the heart of our boom-to-bust economic system. Fairness is one issue. Economic efficiency is the other. On these matters, there are widely diverse opinions and very powerful vested interests doing all they can to preserve the subsidies by which they benefit. The 2017 tax bill signed by President Trump did not, in my opinion, address any of these fundamental problems for the simple reason that there is no distinction made between income that is rent-derived and therefore unearned and income earned producing goods or delivering services. In fact, unearned income received even more advantageous tax treatment. The new president is seeking even greater relief for inherently speculation-driven rent-seeking activities. With this as an introduction, let's look in some detail at the most important segments of our economy and at the benchmarks of who owns what and how income is distributed in our society. First, we examine the state of manufacturing in the United States. And we've reached the end of part 1.